Hey Leon, how's it going?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Yeah, all good, thanks, brother. Welcome to the Happiness Festival and the Happiness Institute. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'd love you just to kick off with your story, please.
Yeah. So when I was 19 years old, I was actually um, pulled over by three Pittsburgh police officers during what they call a routine traffic stop. I provided my driver's license, my registration, and my car insurance. These officers ran my files in their database, and I didn't have any warrants or anything of that nature. Then these officers basically looked up a guy named Lamont Ford, who happened to have a warrant. They told me that I was lying about my identity. They suggested that I was in fact this Lamont Ford, not Leon Ford. They basically threatened me for over 20 minutes, about what they would do to me, if I was lying about who I said I was. And toward the end of the traffic stop, these officers tried to pull me out of the car, and I panicked. When I panicked, I actually drove off, and one of the officers jumped inside of my vehicle, and he shot me 5 times, point blank range. I crashed my car into a porch of a nearby home, and these officers, they pulled me out of the car. They slammed me on the ground. They handcuffed me. The officers even told me that they hoped I would die. And next thing I remember was, waking up in the ICU, shackled to the bed, under guard by a police officer. That's when I found out that I was going to be charged with several felony offenses. And I also found out that I would be paralyzed for the remainder of my life. It was, in those moments that I realized that I didn't want to go to prison. And I had two goals. One, to fight for my freedom, and two, to rehabilitate myself. And so as I got out the hospital, and went through rehab, I began using my voice in my community and on social media to move people, to organize people, and to fight for my freedom. I was end up acquitted of all charges, and ultimately end up receiving a settlement from my city about 7 years later, and so. My case concluded actually last year. So that course of, those 7 years, it was very traumatic. It was, a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster. And, although it was a traumatic roller coaster, I've gained a lot of support nationally and internationally. I ended up deciding to run for city council in the city of Pittsburgh last year, which changed when I realized that it was time for me to focus on healing internally and really putting myself first. So I had to make a conscious decision to choose me. And I chose me because although I was doing great things in the community and I was receiving awards, and externally it looked as if I was successful, internally I was suffering. And so I made a decision to heal internally. And that decision single-handedly changed my life.
And I guess what were the tools, what were the rituals, what was the thought process that led you to get into that state of mind, to have the strength to pursue that path when everyone wanted you to go down the political route?
Mindfulness. So actually, went to a meditation retreat with Dina Kaplan and The Path. And Dina's actually how I got connected with Voyagers. And so I went to a meditation retreat in Mexico, and we meditated, for about 4 or 5 days, I believe it was. And when I left, I had a renewed spirit, right? I had this clarity that was burning up inside of me. However, when I flew back to Pittsburgh, right, I was like, wow, I have all this support. How am I going to tell these people that this is not what I want to do, right? And so I was overwhelmed, and I didn't know like how to communicate that. And so I went into a depression, and the only way I thought that I could get out this depression, because it was so deep and dark, was through therapy. And I made a decision to go to therapy. And in the time, while I was doing a short film about my campaign, and so the filmmaker, right, the director, he was like, "Bro, can we film your session?" I told them, it's like, just reach out to the therapist. I don't have the energy to be creative right now. And he reached out to my therapist, and she said it was okay. If I was okay with it, she was okay with it. And we filmed that session. And it was during that session that is in the short film that I came to that breaking point, and that realization that this is not what I want to do, and I shouldn't feel guilty for choosing me.
I think one of the unique things about you, and when I say one, I could list hundreds. We are all, as people, individuals, and we are all unique, but you are particularly unique. And I think one of the reasons is because you've been through something so traumatic and tragic. And, we're going to talk about why it's important to be talking to you today of all days. But I think people who are involved with the Happiness Institute and the Happiness Festival, and the people that are going to be watching this, would be interested to understand how you can find such strength, such resilience, and ultimately be willing to talk about the topic of happiness when you've clearly gone through so much pain and anguish.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, in the beginning, it was turning pain into purpose, right? That was like my mantra while I was going through that adversity, when it was so painful and it was hard to suppress it, right? Going through trial, I was like, this is connected to my purpose, right? I have to speak out about it. I have to change what's happening. As time progressed, it was more of an understanding of life, right? In life, there's always going to be some type of adversity. I don't care, how much money you have. I don't care. It doesn't matter, how mindful you are. You're going to have some form of adversity, and it's a task, right? An internal task for you to figure out the best way to overcome that adversity. And I don't look at happiness as like a cliche, right? As something that is like, oh, I'm having a good time, I'm happy, right? But more as an internal calmness, right? Internal peace, having a peace of mind in the midst of chaos. And I know when we think about chaos, right? It's like, it can be very, frustrating. It can be confusing. It can be overwhelming. It can make you angry and upset. But through mindfulness, through, thinking about your life and the best way that you want to live, right? You can, dive deep within yourself to find that peace in the midst of adversity, because it's there, right? That peace of mind is always there. It's just the challenge of finding it, right?
And so, how did you find it? Because I think, mindfulness is a word that is thrown around very liberally at the moment, and for good reason, right? Because it is helping a lot of people. But sort of really specifically, how did you get to a point where you achieved mindfulness, you achieved this sort of inner peace that made you feel like you'd found happiness within?
It wasn't one thing, right? It was multiple things. It was, friendships, right? Family, that love that would circulate and just fill me up. It was music, listening to music that I loved, listening to music that inspired me. It was watching motivational videos on YouTube, right? Videos that inspired me. It was doing guided meditations on YouTube. It was, reading literature, right? I love reading. It was, finding, quotes from these books that really, really stood out to me. One is As a Man Thinketh, right? By James Allen. I think I have it sitting here. As a Man Thinketh, right? And it's like, creating that garden, right? And nurturing that garden in your mind. What does that look like, right? And so for me, I knew and I became aware of the seeds that I needed to plant in my head, in my mind, in the midst of that chaos. And those seeds were, that love from family and friends, the music, the books that I would read, and I created an environment in my mind where it was so healthy. And when my mind was healthy, it transformed my thoughts. And when my thoughts became more clear, became more focused, became more positive. It really transformed my life. And it's interesting because, even before my settlement, I was on this path, and I would tell people nothing changed but my perspective of my circumstances. Right? I'm still in a wheelchair, right? I'm still, I still have some of the physical pain associated with, my injury. But my perspective of my circumstances changed, which helped me to become more happy, helped me to become more present in the moment, helped me to, identify good things that I should connect to and let go of some of the bad coping mechanisms that I was holding on to.
Well, you said being present in that beautiful response. And I guess I'd love to know from your perspective how much being present contributes to your pursuit of happiness.
Being present plays a huge role, right? Because I am here now, right? Most of the times, even though like I live with what happened to me, I don't go back to that moment every day, right? I have reminders of it. However, I don't relive it because I'm living in the present moment, right? I'm also not living in the future, so I'm not anxious about what's going to happen next. I'm just fully present in the moment, and that provides a certain level of joy within itself.
That makes sense, but I'm going to push you a little bit further, Leon. How do you stay present? What do you do to remind yourself that you should be in the present? Have you just got the self-control mentally now where you don't spend any time thinking about the past or worrying about the future? Or do you have tools? Do you have rituals that sort of remind you to stay in the present?
Yeah, so now I have the mental capacity, right, to stay in the present. Before, it was reading books, right? Reading books and having this literature. I believe it was like The Power of Now that talked about like when you're washing your hands, really like what are you feeling, right? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? In every moment, becoming more mindful of breathing, right? There's a lot of people who say that they don't know how to meditate. I encourage people. I say, just breathe and pay attention to your breaths. If you really pay attention to your breaths for about 2 to 3 minutes, you'll get to a point where you're not thinking about anything but your breaths. And then after like 2 or 3 minutes after that, you realize you're not even paying attention to your breaths. And then you'll like snap out of it and you're like, yeah, what was I thinking about? Right? And you're like, you weren't thinking about anything. Right. And so doing little things like that, you know, becoming more mindful and aware of your body, right? Of, you know, how your fingers move, right? You know, how you roll or how you walk, right? How does your voice sound, right? Listening to your own voice, not, you know, through your ears, and becoming aware, like there's something coming out of my mouth, but I can hear it in my ears, right? And what do I hear in the background? And really becoming, you know, taking that time to become aware of where you are, what you feel, what you're hearing, what do you taste, what do you see, and I mean that's a start, right? But as you begin to practice it more and more, you begin to awaken to a different truth that really leads to this inner peace, right? And it also reading different literature to help you gain a better understanding of the world, gaining a better understanding of, you know, history, right? And religion. It's interesting because religion played a huge role in my life. I don't have one practice. My grandfather always told me, he says, I'm a student of all religions, but I practice love. You know, and that's something that I really brought into my life. And I would just find inspiration wherever I could find it. You know, wherever I could find positivity, wherever I could connect with something that could bring more light into my world, I would connect to it, and I would memorize these quotes and apply them to my life.
Your passion and zest for life is infectious, and it's what drew me to you initially. And even now, you know, with what's going on in America, to see you smiling and to see you as passionate and as happy as you were when I first met is wonderful to see. And yeah, I know you're also not sleeping as well as you normally do. So much so that I've had to send you a few emails over the last three or 4 days telling you to go back to sleep when it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I guess, you know, what do you make of the current situation with George Floyd? Do you feel at the moment that your happiness is under threat, or are you managing to find the resilience to maintain your happiness? And I guess from a less subjective perspective, how can you help people who are really struggling at the moment, going through this experience in the US, to I guess find the resilience and the happiness that you have found?
Yeah, I think for me it's been another roller coaster. However, I'm able to be realistic about what's happening here in America, what's been happening, and what'll continue to happen if we don't collectively use our voices to change the culture here. But I've also had a balance with mindfulness and just being present, right? So it's like being realistic, being mindful, right? And then how do I channel, right? Because realistically, I'm angry, I'm outraged, I'm confused, I'm overwhelmed, right? And so that's how I was. Like last Friday was like the toughest day for me, those feelings were more intensified. But then, you know, over the course of the weekend, Saturday I didn't eat at all, and I haven't been sleeping. Sunday I had the Voyagers call, which, you know, connecting to that energy and that group of friendships, right, really meant a lot to me. And that was like the first shift, right? So remember I talked about that garden in my mind where friendships and family, right? Friendships and family exist, and they create this love. So the energy on the Voyager's call really shifted my thought pattern. And it was really Jason on the call, who's actually from Pittsburgh, right? And when he mentioned the friend of his who was on the other side of the table when I was doing mediation, after that call, I reached out to that guy, and I was like, hey, we got to do something, right? And because during that call, I realized the power of connectedness, right? And, I'm on this Voyager's call with all these folks from Europe, right, that I met in Europe. And then there's this guy from Pittsburgh who is friends with a guy that I'm friends with, right, that I looked at as a mentor, who used to be someone I viewed as a threat or as an enemy, right, because he was the mayor's chief of staff here in Pittsburgh, right? And so I reached out to him, and I began to connect these dots, right? And then later on that evening, I had a mentor who's a business owner, who he's actually a white Republican, right? And so, he like people who may be a little bit more, I don't want to say small-minded, but people may not understand, like, how does Leon have a white mentor who's a Republican in America with all the divisiveness with politics? He's a genuine human being, right? And so he texted me and said, can you pray for my store? And I said, yes, I can pray for your store, but I'm about to pull up to your store. And and I drove to his store, and he ended up, he pulled up as well, and he was just overwhelmed. Like, he didn't understand why'd you take this risk and come here, And I told him, because you're my friend, right? And this is what community looks like. And so he's been a friend and a mentor for me for years. And I value him, right? And I love him. I appreciate him. And so I showed up for him. And in that moment, I told him, like, this is what happens when you build genuine relationships, right? You show up for one another. And so while there are, people protesting, there are people rioting and looting, right? He had me as a friend. He didn't ask me to come there. He asked me to pray, but I came, right? I showed up for him because he is my friend. And so, again, creating that garden, right, of love, of kindness, of appreciation in my mind helped out a lot. And then the following day, which was Monday, I had therapy, right? So I also go to therapy. And that really put everything in perspective for me, right? And helped me acknowledge some of the feelings that, I had experienced. It helped me think about how I wanted to move forward. And it just helped me, she helped me become she became a sounding board for me to help me process some thoughts. And then, I came out of therapy feeling great. Tuesday, I meditated. I did a guided meditation Tuesday night with Dina Kaplan and The Path. And, again, having this routine of like creating an environment where I can be happy in the midst of so much chaos and intensity in this country. Because, ultimately, we have, the paintbrush, the paint, whatever it is we want on the canvas of our life, and I know how much happiness means to me. And so I have to be intentional about creating that happiness. I'm also very in tune with my inner child, right? So I have like these small hobby cars that I've learned to build with my son. And we also have like tons of Nerf guns, and like we have these Nerf wars in the house. And I just found peace and like happiness and joy and, feeding the inner child in me and building meaningful relationships, reading and mindfulness. It's not, one thing, right? It's, a bunch of different things that I do to create this environment that sustains my happiness and peace of mind.
Understood. I think it's remarkable that you've got this this ability to, get rid of the chaos and create order inside, to curate, to cultivate that inner garden that ultimately leads to happiness. It's incredible, and I'm as ever in awe of you, Leon. But I'm interested. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm interested in what you like, your perspective of what's going on at the moment, and how other people who are, noticeably and adequately, or at least understandably, very angry with what is going on at the moment. What is your advice to them to, I guess, to try and find ways of cultivating their inner garden and finding their happiness, and I guess not also demotivating them from seeking the change that I think we all agree is necessary?
Right. I would say we all have a process. We all have our own process. There was a time when I was out there protesting, and, I was like, fuck the police, right? And I had, T-shirts made that said justice for Leon. They had cops and, said criminals on patrol. But I evolved, right? And so it's hard for me to tell them what to do from my perspective now to where they are, right? My advice to them is to trust your process, right? And try as best as you can to listen to your inner voice. And, the risk that they're willing to take is different than the risk that we may be willing to take right now. Because I remember when I was angry and I was in that similar position that they were in, I was willing to lose my life. I was willing to go to jail, for justice, then as I evolved, as I started to meet different people, as I began to understand different perspectives, my mind expanded, my heart expanded, and I connected with my spirit on a deeper level. And so I strongly believe that as long as they are open-minded, as long as they keep their hearts open, and, they're receptive to all of the moments that they're going to experience, and they can see the lessons in every moment, then they will be okay. It's kind of like, Santiago and the Alchemist telling a shepherd in Andalusia, Spain, how to get to Egypt, right? Like, I don't know if have you ever read The Alchemist?
I have. It's a great book.
Yeah, and so he can only give, little advice and say, hey, just, be aware of the good omens and, find your way, because it's up to that shepherd to get lost, to find him or herself over and over again before they realize their personal legend, right? Mm-hmm. Before they realize their purpose. And so, I feel in ways that, I'm Santiago, but I've already went to Egypt, right? And I've already made my pilgrimage back home to find the treasure under the tree where I started at, But
is that the message, that the treasure that Santiago travels all the way to Egypt to find is just, it's within us, it is, you don't need to travel, you don't need to find it elsewhere. It is in there. And although I think that is certainly very a very important message, I wonder whether that is sufficient to the vast majority of people who are, rioting and in a state of perpetual chaos because of the injustice that they feel with what's recently taken place, but also just generally. I was listening to Muhammad Ali a couple of hours ago, and even back then, he was articulating something that hasn't changed. Why everything is white. He was asking, why are all the angels white? Why is Tarzan, the king of the jungle, white? Why is the White House called the White House? Why is blackmail called blackmail? Why was the ugly duckling black? There is this institutional racism and injustice that I think is clearly very prevalent in society. And I know that if the vast majority of successful social justice movements have been driven by peaceful protest and by going through the sort of slow motions of changing and influencing heart minds. But I also really deeply empathize with these angry people because I'm angry, and yet I sort of feel I feel confused about how to contribute to the conversation and how to deliver the change that people want. And I completely understand how people aren't happy in this moment. And I guess my question is, does that unhappiness and that feeling of injustice actually drive them to sign a petition that they wouldn't have previously signed? Does it actually galvanize them to seek the change and to change their own behavior and contribute towards this fight that they're facing? And so my question to you is, can you also pursue change? Can you also speak truth to power? Can you also find the change that you want whilst also being happy in the process?
Absolutely. I wrote the article, America Whooped My Ass and I Smile, right? And I spoke about my lived experience in America, which was very real, right? It was raw, it was authentic, but I still find joy, right? So, you might have protesters who are angry and outraged, right? But there's some type of joy, some type of happiness that they still hold on to in their lives. Be it when they go home and they may eat their mom's peach cobbler, right? Or if they go home and, they're playing a video game. Like, we all have to find some form of peace, no matter how chaotic our lives may be at the moment. And the anger, the frustration is necessary, right? Like, you can't change what you're willing to tolerate, right? And 100% dissatisfaction requires 100% change. So if you're 100% dissatisfied, if you're angry, if you're outraged, then you're going to do what you're going to be willing to do more to change the system, right? And back to the analogy, with Santiago, or if we think about Muhammad Ali or Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi, no matter how peaceful or radical one may be, as long as you have that true conviction in your spirit, and if you believe you're doing the right thing, then of course you're going to be willing to take risks that other people aren't willing to take. Of course you're going to say things that or say and do things that other people may not be willing to say or do. But if you can live with that tomorrow, if you can live with that 5 years from now, if it feels right in the moment, then there's not too much that someone externally can say, right? And if Muhammad Ali had to go to prison, or Nelson Mandela had to go to prison for what they believed in, in that moment they may have been looked at as the bad guy, but as time progressed, they were celebrated for it. So sometimes you may have to look like the bad person in one season, to really evoke change and to be celebrated in another.
So do you actually think that, using the examples of the people you just gave, Gandhi, Mandela, and Ali, do you think that they were more effective in their pursuit of success and transformational societal change once they'd found happiness within?
Absolutely. Once you find that happiness within, once you find that sense of purpose, right? Because I strongly believe happiness is connected to purpose. Because you can be in the midst of chaos, but if you find your purpose and you strongly believe that what you're doing, is for a greater good and is connected, to your spirit, right, and your spiritual purpose, then you're going to be willing to take risk, right? And it may look chaotic from the outside looking in, but you could be completely at a peace of mind. When I was protesting and I was, bucking at the mayor and, shutting the streets down, I had a peace of mind, right? Like in the midst of all the chaos, all the police officers and the police dogs, I really felt a strong sense of purpose, right? And it was that propelled me into this leadership role, right? And really feeling like, yo, I have a voice, right? I'm having an impact on the world. I'm changing the way things are done, right?
Let me ask you this, Leon. Do you think you would have found happiness to the same degree that you have if you hadn't been pulled over by that policeman, if you still had mobility and you were living the life you were living previously?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if, my purpose would have been one that would have had such an impact on the world, right? I mean, bro, we met in Portugal, right? I'm not sure I would have ever met you if it wasn't for that traffic stop, and I'm not sure that I would have changed as many lives as I have if it wasn't for that traffic stop. I do believe, I would have found happiness, right? Yeah, I would have had a different type of purpose, but the purpose and the role that I have now is significant to the time that we are living in, and that makes me. It provides a sense of it's fulfilling, right? I feel connected. I feel aligned, and I understand that it's something that had to happen for me to find my personal legend. Back to the Alchemist. It's like if Santiago didn't get robbed, and I think it was I forgot which city it was, but when he got robbed, and then he had to, yeah, exactly, and then he had to go work for the crystal merchant. Right? And if he never got robbed, he would have never met the crystal merchant, and he changed the crystal merchant's life. Right? The crystal merchant changed his life. And if that never happened, maybe he wouldn't have never met Fatima, right? And like all these things, and then like if he never met Fatima, maybe he would have never met the Alchemist, right? Like he wasn't on a path where he wanted to meet the Alchemist. He was wanting to find his treasure in Egypt, but he met the Alchemist, and he learned so much about himself and the soul of the world, which I feel connected to. If I'd never got shot, I wouldn't have learned so much about myself and the soul of the world. I can go anywhere in the world and communicate with people who come from a completely different background than I did. Right?
It's interesting that we both said the phrase "found happiness." And do we think that's something you find? There's that quote about happiness isn't a destination; it's just the journey. And yet, we both said, found happiness. And is it something that we should be trying to find? Or is there another way to look at it, which makes it not something that you find, it's just something that you are?
Absolutely. There's a quote, and it's by a spiritual teacher. And he says, going in search of self is an illusion, right? Just be who you are. And I think that we've been so culturally conditioned not to be who we are, but to respond and react to situations and circumstances, right? Which then we lose ourselves and we lose our happiness. So it's
Who are you?
Leon is my given name. I'm so much more than Leon, and it's hard to explain or express that to someone other than myself because I'm so much, right? I'm you know, right now I feel I'm love, right? And I'm committed to loving, right? I'm life. You know, I'm compassionate, I'm thoughtful, you know, I'm patient. I'm so much. But Leon is just, it's the brand, right? When we think of a company, right, we see the brand, but there's all these different personalities who, you know, work for this company and they create this product or this experience. And we just see the brand, but there may be thousands of people helping that brand become what it is. For me, I'm Leon, but there's thousands of, you know, characteristics about me, you know, and the brand is just a word, right? And my name is just a word to describe who I am so people can identify me. You know, same thing like what I do. You're an activist. Well, that's a word that someone externally needs to label me so they can identify what I do. But I'm so much more than an activist.
That was a really powerful answer. Thank you for that. I guess a couple more questions. It's a very, very complex word, happiness. It's heavily nuanced. It means something different to every single person. I'd like you to answer the question, what does happiness mean to you? But I want you to answer it in two parts, please. One would be just in one word, and then the other can be more verbose, more words.
Happiness to me is love. And I say that because I feel like, just like happiness, love is a word that it can mean so much or it can mean nothing at all, right? Depending on your lived experience and your association with that word. But when we find what that word means for us, right? And when we are committed to that word, giving it, you know, receiving it, we then become connected to ourselves and we can live our truth. And so, you know, I can be experiencing chaos, but I can still be love and I can still love people, right? I can not disagree with someone, but I can still love them, you know? I mean, I have siblings. We fought growing up, right? But I love them. So you can fight someone and still love them. Yeah, and I think it's, you know, a word that, you know, we should all find out what and explore. What does love mean to me? What does happiness mean to me? You know, how can I provide people? How can I help people experience more love? How can I help people experience more happiness? And from my experience, helping people to experience more love and more happiness has helped me experience more love and more happiness.
Leon, it's been a real privilege talking to you for the last hour. Thank you so much for giving us your perspective on happiness. Thank you for contributing to the Happiness Festival, and I hope you will support the Happiness Institute moving forward. I think to finish off, do you want to do your the way that you finish off your sessions with all your brothers?
Would you mind repeating after me?
I will repeat after you, brother.
So much, bro. We must give up to go up.
We must give up to go up.
We must give up to grow up.
We must give up to grow up.
We must give up on the way up.
We must give up on the way up.
And give up even more to stay up.
And give up even more to stay up.
I cannot teach.
I cannot teach.
What I do not know.
What I do not know.
I cannot lead.
I cannot lead.
Where I will not go.
Where I will not go.
I am.
I am.
Because we are.
Because we are.
We are.
We are.
Because I am.
Because I am.
I am my brother's keeper.
I am my brother's keeper.
I am my sister's keeper.
I am my sister's keeper.
I am destined for greatness.
I am destined for greatness.
Because I attract.
Because I attract.
What I am.
what I am.
The African language, we say Ashe,
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 Ashe.
Ashe.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
That's
Stay happy.
likewise, man.